Today, I'm going to tell you the story of two enemies forced to work together during America's bloodiest conflict. A sharpshooter from the South and a captain from the North discover a shocking connection amid the smoke and chaos of 1863's battle. The truth was more shocking. Please subscribe to our channel and comment where you're listening from. The bullet flew with deadly precision through the hazy July air, cutting across the Pennsylvania field like fate. Samuel Hawkins exhaled slowly as he watched through his scope, the familiar recoil of his Whitworth rifle still reverberating through his shoulder. At 600 yards, it was a shot few men could make, but Samuel wasn't just any soldier. He was the most feared sharpshooter in the Army of Northern. Got him! More to himself than to the Confederate private crouched beside him in the tall grass. Through his scope, Samuel watched the Union officer crumple, clutching his shoulder before disappearing behind a stone wall. The blue-coated soldiers scattered like startled birds, diving for cover, unable to determine where the shot had come from. "Glory be, Sergeant Hawkins!" Excitement. "That must be your 15th officer this week." Samuel lowered his rifle, expression unchanged. 14th. He wiped sweat from his forehead, the grimy sleeve. The July heat was unbearable, especially on this third day of fighting at Gettysburg. He didn't share the boy's enthusiasm. There was a time early in the war when each successful shot had filled him with fierce pride. 2 years of bloodshed had tempered that feeling into something. He no longer saw uniforms through his scope, just men with families, men who would never return home. "We need to move," Samuel said, already gathering his equipment. "They'll send a patrol this way soon enough." The sound of artillery thundered across the landscape. They crawled backward through the grass, away from their position. Pickett's charge was underway. General Lee's desperate gamble to break the Union center. From their elevated position on the forested ridge, Samuel could see the massive Confederate assault advancing across the open field toward the Union line on Cemetery Ridge. "Should we head back to our regiment, Sergeant?" Eyes wide, Samuel. "We have orders to disrupt their artillery crews on this flank." We moved to the next position. As they made their way through the woods, the roar of battle intensified. Samuel tried not to think about the slaughtered field. Instead, he focused on his next vantage point, his next target. The war had taught him to narrow his vision, to think only of the immediate task. Dwelling on the bigger picture led to questions he couldn't afford to ask. They reached a small clearing that offered a view of the Union artillery position. Samuel set up quickly, years of practice evident in his efficient movement. Through his scope, he surveyed the chaos of the Union battery. The cannon crews worked frantically, loading and firing at the advancing Confederate line. His eye settled on an officer, a captain judging by the insignia, directing the artillery fire. The man moved with purpose, shouting orders and gesturing emphatically. Samuel centered his crosshairs on the officer's chest, his finger caressing the trigger. He drew a slow breath, ready to squeeze, when something stopped him. The captain had turned, revealing his full face. There was something hauntingly familiar about the man's, something that made Samuel's finger freeze on the trigger. The moment of hesitation cost him dearly. "Rebel sharpshooters! There!" a shout rang out from the Union line. "Move!" Samuel yelled to the private, abandoning his position as rifle fire erupted around them. They sprinted through the trees as bullets splintered bark and tore through leaves around them. A sharp cry behind him told Samuel that the private hadn't been fast enough. He turned to see the boy sprawled on the forest floor, blood blossoming across his gray jacket. "Go on, Sergeant," the private gasped, his young face already ashen. "I'm done for." Samuel hesitated only a moment before kneeling beside the dying boy. "What's your name, son?" he asked, realizing with shame that he'd never bothered to learn it. "Thomas Wilson," was barely audible now. "From Roanoke County." "I'll tell them you died bravely, Thomas Wilson," Samuel promised, closing the boy's sightless eyes. The sound of approaching Union soldiers forced Samuel deeper into the forest. He moved swiftly through the underbrush, his thoughts troubled. Why had he hesitated? What was it about that Union captain that had stayed his hand? The momentary lapse had cost young Thomas his life, and that blood was on Samuel's hand. As dusk fell, the sounds of battle began to fade. The air was thick with smoke and the distant moans of the wounded. Samuel knew the Confederate forces had failed to break the Union line. General Lee's gamble had not paid off. Thousands of Southern boys lay dead or dying on that blood-soaked field. Samuel found himself cut off from his regiment, deep behind enemy lines. He would need to move carefully through Union territory to rejoin the Confederate Army, which would surely be retreating south soon. He settled into a hollow beneath a fallen tree, planning to rest until full darkness provided better cover for movement. Sleep eluded him as the face of the Union captain appearing in his mind. There was something about those features, the set of the jaw, the shape of the eyes, that tugged at Samuel's memory. But exhaustion eventually won out, and he drifted into a fitful sleep filled with dreams of home, of Virginia before the war, strangely, of a brother he hadn't seen in 15 years. He awoke to the cold press of metal against his temple. "Don't move, Reb, or the last thing you'll feel is a Yankee bullet in your brain." Samuel opened his eyes to find himself staring into the face that had haunted his dreams, the Union captain from the artillery battery. Up close, the sense of familiarity was even stronger, sending a chill down Samuel's spine. "Captain James Mitchell, Union Army," the man said, his revolver unwavering. "And you're coming with me, sharpshooter." The name hit Samuel like a physical blow. Mitchell. It couldn't be. He studied the captain's face more carefully, the gray-blue eyes, the small scar above the right eyebrow, a childhood fall from an apple. "James," Samuel whispered with disbelief. "James Mitchell from Lexington?" The Union officer's expression shifted from determination to confusion, then to shocked recognition. "Samuel?" The captain's voice faltered. "Samuel Hawkins?" The revolver didn't waver, but something profound had changed in the air between them. "My God," it's barely on. "My childhood friend, now the enemy I've been hunting?" Samuel's mind reeled with the implications. James Mitchell, the boy who had been like a brother to him until Samuel's family had moved south to Virginia, the boy whose father had been a staunch abolitionist, causing a bitter falling out with Samuel's slave-owning father. "Lower your weapon, James. We have much to discuss." "I think not." Tightening. "You've killed dozens of my men with that rifle. The Confederacy's deadliest sharpshooter, they call you. And you've commanded artillery that's torn apart hundreds of mine. That's war." A tense silence stretched between them, laden with 15 years of separation and 2 years of bloody conflict. "The boy today," James finally said, "the one with you, was he your first?" Samuel's expression. "His name was Thomas Wilson, and no, he wasn't the youngest." Something in James's eyes shifted. He lowered his revolver slightly, but kept it trained on Samuel. "Get up," he ordered. "Slowly. We're both behind enemy lines now. Pickett's charge failed, but there are patrols everywhere. Confederate stragglers being around." Samuel rose, noting that, despite the words, they were effectively in the same predicament. James, a lone Union off, potentially surrounded by retreating Confederate forces, and Samuel, as a Confederate soldier in Union-controlled territory. "What now, Captain?" Samuel asked, emphasizing James's rank with a hint of irony. James Mitchell studied his childhood friend, now his enemy, with conflicted. "Now," he said, with grim determination, "we survive this night, and then we figure out which of us is the prisoner." Dawn broke reluctantly over the Pennsylvania woodland, filtering through the leaves in muted shades of gold. Samuel and James had spent the night in uneasy, taking turns keeping watch from the shelter over. Neither man had slept well, too aware of the years present, too conscious of what the other represented. Samuel studied his childhood friend in a growing light. James looked older than his 40 years, his face lined with command. The Union captain was examining a map, occasionally glancing up to get his bearings. "Union forces will be advancing south," said finally, "following Lee's retreat. We need to move west, away from the main lines." "We?" Samuel raised an eyebrow. "I don't recall agreeing to travel with you." James folded the map deliberately. "You're technically my prisoner, Hawkins." "Am I?" Samuel's hand drifted toward the knife concealed in his boot. "You seem to have forgotten to tie me up." A ghost of a smile touched James's lips. "I haven't forgotten your skill with knots, or how quickly you could slip them." The reference to their childhood sent an unexpected pang through Samuel. Memories of summer days spent by the creek in Lexington, learning to tie fishing knots, swimming in the cool water, believing their friendship would last forever. "That was a long time ago," Samuel said flatly, "before your father's politics poisoned everything." James's expression hardened. "My father stood for what was right. Yours chose property over principle." "Is that what you tell yourself?" Samuel's voice was low with anger. "That this war is as simple as right and wrong?" "Isn't it?" James challenged. "What else would you call a fight to preserve the right to own human beings?" Before Samuel could retort, a sound froze them both. Voices approaching through the trees. James quickly drew his revolver, but Samuel held up a hand. "Confederate patrol," he whispered, recognizing the southern accents. 3 maybe 4 men. James's jaw tightened, outnumbered in enemy territory. Samuel could easily call out, turn the tables on his captor. Their eyes met in a moment of silent negotiation. To Samuel's own surprise, he found himself motioning for James to. He couldn't explain the impulse, even to himself. The patrol passed within 30 yards, visible 4 weary Confederates making. One was wounded, leaning heavily on a comrade. They moved on without detecting the hidden men. "Why?" James asked when they were gone. Samuel didn't answer immediately. "They're heading south. We need to go west." The explanation sounded hollow, even to his own ears. James studied him for a long moment. "We have a better chance of surviving if we work together," he finally said, "at least until we reach safer territory." Samuel knew he was right. Lone soldiers on either side risked being shot. Deserters or spies. 2 men watching each other's back stood a better. "Agreed," Samuel said reluctantly. "But understand this, I haven't changed side. When we reach safety, we go our separate." "Fair enough, James. Your rifle would draw too much attention. You use this." He offered Colt Navy revolver. Samuel took the weapon, checking its load. 6 shots. "Let's hope we don't need them." They moved out, keeping to the dense woods, avoiding patrols expected. The day grew hot, humid air clinging to their skin. Occasionally they heard distant gunfire, skirmishes between rear guards and advance units as the Confederate Army retreated and the Union forces. "Your accents changed," James observed during a "more Virginia than Kentucky." 15 years will do that, Samuel. "You sound the same." "Massachusetts doesn't change a man as much as Virginia, I suppose." Samuel drank from his canteen, the water warm and metallic. "What took you to Massachusetts?" "Harvard, law school." James leaned against a tree trunk. "I was practicing in Boston when the war began." "A lawyer." Samuel wasn't surprised. James had always been the one arguing points, debating everything from fishing spots to the fastest route home. "I went west, California gold fields. Then back to Virginia when the war started." "Strike it rich?" James asked. "Rich enough," Samuel shrugged. "Enough to buy land in the Shenandoah. It's probably burned to ash now, courtesy of your General Sheridan." James didn't deny it. The Union's scorched earth policy in the Shenandoah Valley was well known. "I had a wife," continued, surprised at his own. "Sarah. Fever took her in '59. "I'm sorry," James said, and seemed to mean it. "I married too, Eleanor. She's in Washington now, working in a hospital." Conversation drifted into too many years, too much blood between them for easy reminiscence. They continued westward through the afternoon, skirting a farm where Union cavalry had established a temporary headquarters. From their vantage point on a wooded hill, they could see blue-coated soldiers leading horses to a stream, setting up tents. "Major Hollister's unit," James, recognizing the guidon. "We should wait until dark to." As they watched, a covered wagon arrived at the farmhouse, escorted by mounted soldiers. A tall officer dismounted and entered the house, followed by 2 others carrying document cases. "That's Colonel Burke," James said, a note of surprise in his voice. "Intelligence Division. What's he doing out here?" "Intelligence?" Samuel's interest sharpened. "What kind of intelligence?" "The kind that isn't shared with artillery officers," James replied dryly. "But Burke reports directly to General Meade. If he's here instead of at headquarters, it's significant." Samuel studied the scene below. They're being careful with those documents. The sun began to set, painting the landscape in deepening shades of amber. As darkness fell, lanterns were lit in the farmhouse, silhouetting figures moving behind curtained windows. "Something's happening. Those aren't regular staff." A shout from behind them shattered the quiet. "Hold there! Don't move!" They turned to find 2 Union soldiers, rifles raised, not 20 yards away. A patrol they'd somehow missed. And "Captain Mitchell?" One of the soldiers stepped forward, recognizing James's uniform. "Sir, this area is restricted by order of Colonel Burke." "At ease, Private," James replied with practiced authority. "I'm escorting a prisoner for questioning." He gestured toward Samuel, whose Confederate gray was unmistakable even in the dim light. The soldiers hesitated, exchanging glances. "We have orders to bring anyone we find to the farmhouse, sir," the private said. "Even officer." "Colonel's orders." James nodded stiffly. "Of course. Lead the way." As they were marched down the hillside toward the farm, James whispered urgently, "Follow my lead. Something's not right here." Samuel gave an almost imperceptible nod, his mind racing. He'd surrendered his revolver at the soldier's command, but they hadn't found the knife in his boot. 1 weapon, 2 guards, and a farm full of Union officers. The odds weren't good. But as they approached the lantern-lit farmhouse, Samuel sensed that the true danger might not be what either of them had anticipated. The farmhouse kitchen was stifling, heat radiating from the cast-iron stove despite the July evening's natural warmth. Samuel sat on a straight-backed chair, his hands bound behind him, while James stood nearby, maintaining the pretense of a Union officer with his Confederate prisoner. Colonel Burke, a hawk-faced, had questioned them separately before bringing them together. Samuel had kept his answers simple, claiming to be a straggler from Pickett's charge. James had explained finding the sharpshooter hiding in the woods. "Your story checks out," Captain's tones. "Convenient that you captured this particular prisoner." "Sir?" James kept his expression neutral. "Sergeant Hawkins has quite the reputation." Burke. Circling the table were several maps were spread out. "The Gray Ghost," they call him, one of Lee's most effective sharpshooters. Samuel remained silent, his face impassive. The nickname was known only within certain Confederate circles. Burke's knowledge of it was troubling. "I wasn't aware of his identity when I captured him, sir," James replied carefully. Burke's thin smile didn't reach his eyes. "Of course not." He turned to one of his aides. "Major Connolly, escort Captain Mitchell to the study. General Meade's dispatches require immediate attention." James hesitated, glancing at Samuel before following the major. Samuel noted how Burke watched them both, missing nothing. When the door closed, Burke turned his full attention to Samuel. "Now, Sergeant, let's speak plainly. I know who you are, and more importantly, what you're capable of." "I'm just a soldier, Colonel," Samuel replied evenly. "A soldier with 50 confirmed kills, including 12 Union officers. A marksman without equal in the Confederate Army." Burke's voice held a note of admiration. "Your skills are wasted on the losing side of this war." Samuel said nothing, watching as Burke dismissed the remaining guards with a gesture, leaving them alone. "The war is over for the Confederacy," Burke continued, lowering. "Lee's defeat at Gettysburg has sealed it, though the fighting may drag on. Smart men are already preparing for what comes after." "What do you want, Colonel?" Samuel asked bluntly. Burke leaned forward. "I want to offer you a choice, Sergeant, one that could benefit us both." In the study across the hall, James stood uncomfortably as Major Connolly sorted through dispatches, organizing them for transport. "You're with the 5th Artillery, correct?" Connolly asked, without looking up. "Yes, sir. 2nd Brigade." "Odd that you'd be separated from your unit during the pursuit." James had prepared for. "I was forwarding orders to the skirmish line when we encountered heavy resistance. My horse was shot, and I found myself cut off." "Ati, unfortunate," Connolly, though he seemed uninterested in the details. "You performed a service capturing that sharpshooter. He's taken many good men from us." James nodded, his mind racing. Something felt wrong about this entire situation. Burke's interest in Samuel, the secrecy surrounding this improvised headquarters, the way they'd been separated. "Sir, may I ask what Colonel Burke wants with my prisoner?" he ventured. Connolly glanced up sharply. "That's not your concern, Captain. The colonel has his methods for handling valuable prisoners." The implication hung in the air. Burke operated outside normal protocols. James recalled rumors from headquarters about intelligence officers who employed harsh interrogation methods unsanctioned by regular Army command. "Of course, sir," James read, masking his concern. His gaze fell on the documents Connolly was sorting, maps, dispatches, and what appeared to be coded messages. One document caught his attention, a list of names, some crossed out. He couldn't read them from where he stood, but the format was unmistakable. A target list. Meanwhile, in the kitchen, Burke had laid out his proposition to Samuel. "The Confederacy cannot win," the colonel stated flatly, "but certain elements within the Union command structure are concerned about how the war will end, about who will hold power when it does." "You're talking treason," Samuel said quietly. Burke smiled thinly. "I'm talking about the future, about ensuring the right men are in position when peace comes." He tapped a document case on the table. "In 3 days, there will be a meeting between General Meade and several corps commanders near Hagerstown. Decisions will be made about the pursuit of Lee's army." Samuel remained silent, understanding where this was heading. "Some of those commanders need not return from that meeting," Burke continued. "Skilled marksmen could ensure that certain voices are silenced permanently." "You want me to assassinate Union generals?" Samuel stated flatly. "Why would I do your dirty work?" "Because you'd be eliminating the very men who've ordered the destruction of Southern homes and farms, the hardliners who will demand unconditional surrender and harsh occupation. And," he added, Because I'm offering you freedom and safe passage to Virginia afterward. Samuel studied the colonel's face, seeing the ambition barely concealed beneath the patriotic veneer. This wasn't about shaping the peace. It was about eliminating rivals, creating vacancies in the command structure that Burke and his allies could fill. "And if I refuse?" Samuel asked. Burke's expression hardened. "Then you'll be executed as a spy tomorrow morning. Your friend the captain as well, for collaborating with the enemy." "James isn't involved in this," Samuel protested. "No?" Burke raised an eyebrow. "A Union officer happens to capture a notorious Confederate sharpshooter and brings him directly into our path. I find that suspicious." Samuel realized the trap they'd walked in. Whether he accepted or refused, James was in danger. Burke clearly suspected some collusion between them. Across the hall, James had managed to edge closer to the desk while appearing to examine a wall map. The list of names was now visible. Union generals and colonels, with dates and locations noted beside each. 3 names were circled in red ink: Meade, Hancock, Sedgwick. The realization hit him like a physical blow. This was an assassination plot, coordinated from within the Union Army itself, a conspiracy to eliminate key commanders and reshape the war's outcome. The door opened suddenly, and Colonel Burke entered with 2 armed guards. "Major Connolly, secure those documents," Burke ordered sharply. "Captain Mitchell, you'll be our guest tonight. Tomorrow you'll escort our Confederate friend on a special assignment." James straightened, mind racing. "What assignment, sir?" Burke's smile was cold. "Let's just say Sergeant Hawkins will have an opportunity to serve both our causes." As the guards led James away to a makeshift cell in the barn, his eyes met Samuel's across the yard. In that brief moment, a silent understanding passed between them. Whatever their differences, whatever uniform they wore, they were now united against a threat more insidious than either had faced on the battlefield. Treason disguised as patriotism, ambition masked as duty, and time was running dangerous. Dawn arrived with drizzle that turned the farmyard to mud. Samuel sat in the barn, hands still bound, watching James the length of their makeshift prison. They'd spent most of the night in whispered converse, piecing together Burke's plot and debating their options. 3 days until the meeting at Hagerstown, James said, keeping his voice. "Burke wants you to assassinate Meade and possibly Hancock and Sedgwick, while conveniently eliminating the officers who would oppose whatever he and his conspirators are planning," Samuel added. "This goes beyond the war, James. This is about what happens afterward." James nodded grimly. If the hardline generals are eliminated, more moderate or corrupt others would take command. The terms offered to the Confederacy might be more lenient at cost. A divided Union command influenced by men like Burke, power shifting to those who arranged the assassination. The barn door creaked open, admitting a guard with 2 tin plates of beans and hardtack. He set them down without a word and left, locking the door behind. "They'll separate us today," James said, once they were alone again. "Burke will want to brief you on the details of the assignment." Samuel nodded. "And he'll keep you as leverage to ensure I cooperate." They ate in silence, each man lost in thought. The rain drummed steadily on the barn roof, a melancholy rhythm that matched their mood. "I never told you why I joined the Union Army," James said suddenly. "It wasn't just about slavery, though that was reason enough." Samuel looked up, waiting. "I was in Washington when Fort Sumter fell," continued. "I saw Lincoln's call for volunteers, and I remembered something your father once said to mine during their final argument." "What was that?" "He said that when faced with a moral choice, a man must stand with his conscience, even if it costs him everything." James met Samuel's gaze. "Your father said that to justify owning slaves. My father quoted it back to him to explain why he could no longer be silent about it." Samuel absorbed this in silence. The memory of that day was still vivid, his father storming home, declaring the Mitchells would never again be welcome in their house. The bewildered pain of losing his friend without understanding. "My father died believing he stood for what was," Samuel, "as did yours, I imagine." They were both good men who couldn't conviction, but this, what Burke is planning, there's no conviction here. Only the lock rattled, and the door swung open to reveal Colonel Burke, 4 armed gentlemen. Smoothly, "I trust you've had time to consider your situation." Neither man responded. "Captain Mitchell will be accompanying us to a forward position," Burke continued. "Sergeant Hawkins, you'll be briefed on your assignment and provided with the necessary equipment." "And if I refuse?" Samuel asked. Burke's smile was, "Then the captain will be shot as a traitor who conspired with the enemy, and you'll follow shortly after. Make the intelligent choice, Sergeant." As two guards moved to take James away, Samuel made his decision. Years of war had taught him to recognize the moment when action was required. With a swift motion, he pulled the concealed knife in his boot, which they'd somehow overlooked during their research, and lunged forward, slashing through his bond. The next moments, Samuel tackled Burke, while James, surprised but quick to react, grappled with the nearest guard. Shouts echoed through the barn as shots were fired, splintering wood and sending hay dust swirling through the air. When it ended, Burke lay unconscious, two guards were wounded, and James had secured their weapons. The remaining guards had fled, likely to raise the alarm. "We have minutes, at most," James said, binding Burke's hands with the rope that had secured Samuel. Samuel nodded, retrieving the colonel's sidearm and checking its load. "We need those documents, proof of the conspiracy." They moved quickly across the muddy yard, rain soaking their uniform. The farmhouse seemed eerily quiet. Many of the staff officers had departed at first, leaving only Burke's immediate circle. In the study, they found Major Connolly destroying documents, feeding papers into the fireplace. He reached for his pistol when they burst in, but froze when he found himself facing two determined men with leveled weapons. "The dispatch case," James demanded. "Where is it?" "Gone," Connolly replied, his eyes darting between them. "Couriered to Baltimore this morning." Samuel's gaze fell on the desk where several documents remained, including the list of targeted officers. "This will have to do," he said, gathering what hadn't yet been burned. Shouts from outside indicated the alarm had been raised. Union cavalry would be returning soon. "We need to move," James urged. "West, into the mountains. We can reach Union lines at Frederick in 2 days if we push hard." Samuel looked at him in surprise. "Union lines? You expect me to surrender?" "I expect you to help me stop a conspiracy to assassinate Union generals," James. "After that, we'll see." They requisitioned horses from the stable and rode hard, the rain providing cover as they disappeared into the heavily wooded hills. Behind them, bugles sounded as pursuit was organized, but they had a good head start and knowledge of what paths to avoid. That night, sheltering in a cave as the rain continued to fall, they examined the documents they'd salvaged. Names, dates, locations, enough to implicate Burke and several other officers in a plot that went beyond assassination to a full restructuring of the Union command. "This reaches higher than I thought. There are names here. Influential men in Washington. Men who want to shape the peace to their advantage. Not for the Union, not for the Confederacy, but for themselves." The rain finally stopped near dawn. They continued their journey, avoiding road. They encountered a Confederate patrol once, but managed to slip away unseen. The mountains provided cover, but also challenges: steep terrain, limited food, and the constant threat of discovery. On the afternoon of the second day, they reached a ridge overlooking the Union encampment near Frederick. Blue tents spread across the valley, flags hanging limp in the humid air. "This is where we part ways," Samuel said, dismounting stiffly. James looked at him surprised. "You're not coming with me? Into a Union camp wearing Confederate gray?" Samuel, "That's a hanging offense, evidence or no evidence." "I can vouch for you, James." "Your word against Burke's conspirators?" Samuel smiled grimly. "No, you take the evidence. I've written out my testimony." He handed James a folded paper. "It should be enough, combined with the documents." James took it reluctant. "What will you do?" "Head south, rejoin what's left of Lee's army." Samuel's expression was resolute. "This doesn't change where my loyalty lies, James. Even knowing what we know about how this war will end?" Samuel looked out over the valley toward the distant Blue Ridge and Virginia. "Especially, my home will need men to rebuild when it's over." They stood in silence, two friends divided by war yet united by a common decency that transcended their uniform. "In another life," James began. "In another life we might have remained brothers," Samuel finished. He extended his hand. "Godspeed, Captain." James clasped it firmly. "And to you, Sergeant." As James rode down toward the Union camp, carrying evidence that would prevent a conspiracy and possibly shorten the war, Samuel turned his horse south. The Battle of Gettysburg had marked the beginning of the end for the Confederacy. But in those Pennsylvania hills, something else had been preserved. A reminder that beneath the divisions of North and South beat the same human heart, capable of both terrible hatred and profound reconciliation. It would be this heart, not bullets or bayonets, that would ultimately reunite a divided nation.